Hello everyone. I think I shall start with my introduction for some people that do not know me. My name is Daniel, and I've been playing DomiNations for a year now, basically 13 months, pretty much. I do have experience with RTS games in general, MMORPGs and other stuff. I do like a lot the part of theory crafting, the math part, the math part behind the games, and this is what helps me a lot to understand what's right and wrong in certain things, and pretty much asking a lot of questions. And yeah, okay, okay. So the main things that we'll be discussing in this session will be the guide that I've wrote, mainly to help new players understand better how to handle in world wars. But it also contains, I hope, some useful information for more experienced ones. And in the conclusion, I will also ask Lex to play an attack that I've recorded before from my current World War. So yeah, let's begin. So Lex, if you can open the World War guide at chapter 1. Okie dokie. 1 second. There you go. So, what does chapter 1 contains? It contains basically the buildings that will impact you in World War. That is the barracks, evidently, for the starting ages. I've also tried to show here the capacity of your troops. I've made a short description what troops are useful in war and which not so much. For example, let's take mortar units. You shouldn't bother taking those kind of units. They're a bad version of the ranged siege unit, also known as howitzer by most of the people. Um, factory will be replacing your barrack army once you get into later stages of the game. I think global is like the a good age to start using those troops, because even if you get factories from earlier ages, you don't have enough units to actually make useful composition. And it's usually not a good idea to try to mix too much factories with barracks due to coalitions. War Academy. So here I've also made a quick description of each war tactic. For example, in early game, barrage will be really good to clear some town center troops. Even though I've said here stronghold ones, I don't really advise using barrage on stronghold because, for example, there are a lot of people which donate armor cars, and they do have a lot of HP. So even if you use like 2 or 3 barrages on something like that, it's not gonna take it down. So you're just gonna waste precious war tactics against something like that. In the starting ages, in starting I mean let's say up to gunpowder perhaps. I would suggest that the best tactic to use against the field stronghold is protect. because barrage will not work, as I mentioned, if you try to take those down, those beefy units down. First aid, obviously not so much. Sabotage, you cannot sabotage. You can sabotage a stronghold, but you cannot prevent it to spawn the units like you can prevent a town center. So the only viable option is protect, and I would suggest using protect on something like your beefy units, for example, your mercenaries, generals, and even better your gate troops, because in the lower ages, the most important part of your army, in my perspective, is the gate troops, because you can be classical age or medieval age, and you can have Cold War donated troops. So keeping those alive is essential. Okay, dokie. What else do we have? Demolition. I do not really suggest using that. I mean, you can play a little with it for like one age or two, maybe just in gunpowder, but I I don't really suggest using it more than that. Betrayal. It's a tricky one. I think it's a bad tactic in the first levels. I wouldn't suggest using it at least. You should have at least level 2 or 3 before you start using betrayal. Level 1 is way too weak to be used. Decoy is a really good tactic. It's not what it used to be, obviously, when you were going with only decoys. And assault rally is basically the new decoy, and it's even more overpowered. And I don't really like it because the fun thing about rebalance, the part where an Exxon tried to shift things into the favor of defense, is that people were not being able to finish wars at the max number of stars, and they weren't trying to have only time wars. So you really had to plan your attack very good to be able to actually 5-star base. And even when you did plan it, you still had a very good chance of missing either a quick Vic star or I don't know, 100%. And using assault rally, I've noticed this on myself also. I'm not being so I'm not being very attentive to details, So there are some things that I've been very meticulous about in the past when I was planning, and now I just disregard them totally because I know I can just overpower some bases just with sheer strength of this tactic. So in this section, basically, I have the description in the sorry in the section with our War Academy. You can see the stats for each tactic at the max level. Currently, it's not updated with with the last level that was added in the current patch. For example, Assault Rally rank 4 or the new Sabotage that can last up to 22 seconds. So you don't see those ranks now, but I will update it in shortly. Okay, so after this section, in this section, I've also added a few links, a few YouTube links with attacks some people did. These videos were done in the early stages of the assault rally, when people were still using massively heavy tanks, and we were trying to show them that there is a new way, a better way to do things, and frankly, a cheaper way, because heavy tank attacks need a very precise setup of troop tactics. With assault rally, you can deal the same amount of punishment on a base and even go without any troop cards. So it's much more wallet friendly, sort of say, if you know what I mean. Um, Please feel free to interrupt me if you have any kind of questions. I don't want this to be just a monologue. So if you want to know something about the things I'm currently speaking, interrupt me at any time. Um, mercenaries. Yeah, so I would suggest for each age to select the mercenaries which have the highest amount of hit points. Basically, I'm not talking about Cold War age yet, so let's try to ignore that for 1 second. Especially in the lower ages, um, mercenaries are super important because they are like a meat shield that you really need to protect your army, because you don't have any other kind of protection except for generals, and you don't have the decoys yet. The Lion's Gate, castle, forts, and all that other stuff. Okay, so there's not really. Yeah, 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 sure. Well, yeah, that's a nice question. I would start. Well, one of the best nations for starting ages is British because of the shooters, not because they have extra damage, but because they have extra range, so their units can stay alive much longer. They have a lot less towers to worry about shooting them. Another very good option, and to be honest, it's frankly a very good option due to the recent patch, is Korean. And that's because they have an increased capacity of War Academy, of war tactics. Basically, because you can use one more assault ready, for example. Um, but your question was about starting ages, I guess. Hugi, hello.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I'm working still, buddy. Uh. Uh. Yeah. Pretty much. The starting ages, and if you would change it, and if you and how you'd use those merc camps to uh help complement those nations as well.
Well, it's I actually have an alt that it's Korean, and it's really nice because in the starting ages, war tactics actually help you a lot. So, for example, if you try to take down some town center troops, and um, they're like really strong, having an extra tactic can really help you, like an extra barrage or an extra sabotage, when you're trying to learn the game. Chinese, for example, have an extra mercenary unit, but frankly, I don't really consider it as impactful as an extra war tactic uh, for um, for World War, especially in the starting ages. There are some nations which I will mention to steer clear from, and those are Greeks and Japanese. They don't really bring any much benefit to the attacking style, especially Japanese, who basically try to reward you for being passive, for not playing the game. Um, what other nations can be good? Well, the Romans can have, yeah, a larger army pool, but it's not gonna help you in the early game. So yes, I would say British and Korean are pretty much very good options to start with. Did this answer your question?
He must be
I
busy, but I have a question for you, Siro.
Sure.
Siro. So this is backtracking a bit, but back when you were talking about, uh, I think it was lower levels versus stronghold and using protect, and
Yes.
you're pretty much saying it to like say you're getting ready to fight the stronghold. You're saying to like save the protect for that moment for the lower ages, like dealing with like armored cars and whatnot. So
Yes.
that's pretty much what you're saying, correct?
Yes.
Okay, just make sure.
Yes,
So people
because you
understand
only have four possible tactics at those level. You have barrage, protect, heal, and sabotage. So
that.
sabotage
Right.
will slow it down by not deploying the stronghold troops too fast. Heal won't really do much at that level. Barrage won't kill them, so you're just gonna waste three or whatever how many tactics you have at that age, and not kill the units if he has, for example, armor car or something else that's beefy. So the only viable option is to use protect. And I've mentioned that a nice thing to use it on is either the mercenaries with generals, which should be in the front of your army, or the alliance gate, because for example, for lower agers, the best donation possible are bazooka units, which can deal very good with units with walls and buildings, and they are quite beefy, to be honest. So trying to keep them alive a little longer so they can dish out more damage overall is a really nice is a good way to do it by using protect on them. So yeah, that was my choice. Also at such a in those ages, you have two options. Maybe I'm going a bit too forward with this now, but since I've started this topic, I'll say it. In those early ages, you have the classical wonder option, which is gonna be either for offensive. I mean, which is gonna be either Colosseum for the strength of the gladiator, which gives you a huge boost for a short time, or the terracotta army, and both are really good options. One thing I would like to emphasize here is that if you use the strength of the gladiator, I also strongly recommend to use it um, on the landscape troops, because those will deal the most amount of damage in your army. If you have, for example, like 30 shooters or something, 30 medieval shooters are not gonna do too much damage in that amount of time, and frankly, you're not gonna be able to um, select all of them with the SOG. Maybe half or whatever, depending on how you position your troops. Um, the mercenaries are like the worst possible target for this, because they're basically mid shields. They don't really have damage. So basically, that leaves either the ranged siege units or the lance gate, and I would really prefer the lance gate because they deal a lot more damage. I mean, you can have Cold War troops there, and your ranged siege will be medieval, so obviously the gate will deal a lot more. The other option is the terracotta army, and that's actually it's the most effective in lower ages, because it brings 20 more units to your army. And if you start thinking about the size of your total army in classical age, when you get that wonder, your total army size is 65. So that means it's a third of your total army in size. If you compare it with the size of your army in atomic, for example, when it's 155, it's a lot less as a percentage wise. So terracotta is really impactful in lower ages. Either of those options is really good. I'm just trying to show how both of them can be used here. So I know I deviated from your question, Lucid, but I hope I also answered it in the process.
Oh yeah, you did. I was just, I understand. Understand what you're saying too. I just wanted to make sure other people get what you were
Yeah.
saying about the protect, the timing and everything about it. So, um, hey, you have some more questions in here too. I don't know if you're seeing it, but do you want me to read them off to you?
Yeah, sure.
So,
Please do.
Love and Power said, how effective is Protect truly going to be for, say, a medieval versus Cold War donated stronghold? I've always gone by the theory that it's best to leave Stronghold for last as a small or to take to have a TT distraction that can buy me a few seconds to finish the base.
Well, actually, I was gonna talk about the attacking, the way I would attack a lower base. For example, let's imagine 3 points. Point A, the point where you want to. No, let's imagine like this: you have the town center and the stronghold on a classical or medieval base. So town center is point A, and stronghold is point B. Obviously, when I want to position my army in such a base, I want to make sure that it's far away from both of them, first of all, so I don't trigger them too soon. And I want to make sure that I position my troops in such a way that I'm gonna reach first the town center and then the stronghold. The reason behind it is because I don't. Um, you have the rally with a long cooldown in those ages, and because it's a small base, you're not gonna have the time to use rally on both of them. You can handle the town center in two ways. You can either sabotage it, or you can use some barrages to clear the troops from it. So you don't really need to rally the town center, especially because it's a bad habit. I'm gonna talk about it later on. So with stronghold, it's best to save the rally for stronghold. So when you get close to it and those start to trigger, that's when you rally onto those troops, and that's when you use um, the protect. So did I answer the question, or did I understand it wrong?
He said, yes, sir.
Okay, okay.
Shani has one as well.
Okay.
He said, hopefully this isn't jumping your gun, but for Atomic and Cold War age players, what tactic mix would you recommend? Two-part question, both currently and also after AR gets nerfed.
Yeah. Well, first of all, now that I use Assault Rally, um, I'm trying to mix it. I've used, for example, for Atomic, both for Atomic and Cold War, something like 5 Assault Rally, 2 sabotages. But you can also use, for example, 5 Assault Rally, 1 sabotage, and one decoy. Decoy can be used, for example, when you know for sure that it's a war where they feel strongholds, and you want to keep those stronghold troops together. I mainly prefer to use it for stronghold, not for fort, because for the fort, for example, I can simply choose to attack from such a way that I take care of their generals pretty fast in the battle when my army is grouped together. So those are some options that I would use currently. I wouldn't use, for example, I don't know, something like protect and heal, because you don't protect is currently useless. Let's be honest. Heal, you don't really need it. I mean, if you actually want some heal, you can add a healing helicopter. Pretty sure that's not the exact name, but you know what unit I'm talking about, the one from the factory. And yeah, there's nothing much else that you could use. The betrayal is not really as effective now. I mean, it's still good, but it's not as good as Assault Rally at the moment. After it gets nerfed, it's gonna be interesting. First of all, we don't know how nerfed it's gonna be. We don't know exactly what they will nerf it. But before Assault Rally, I can tell you that I was mixing things up quite a lot. I mean, I've had attacks where I've used Protect, Heal, Decoy, Betrayal, pretty much everything that, well, everything apart from Barrage and Demolition, which are bad. Yeah, so depends how the war tactics are gonna be affected after possible rebalance, because I'm not really sure if they're gonna just nerf Assault Rally. Maybe they will do some other changes. So it's really too early to tell. But I do encourage people to mix them up and play with the compositions, because they're not gonna be able to use just one composition for everything. It depends a lot on the base. That was the beauty of attacking after the rebalance. You could mix things up in so many ways, not just have one certain type of attacking strategy like it's now. It's getting quite boring, actually. I hope this answered your question, Shani. Okie dokie. So, is there anything else as questions in the moment?
I'd like to know, Siro, what generals do you take into your hits?
Yes, indeed. So for attacking, it's best to use the generals which have the highest amount of hit points, because those will serve as a silo destruction later on, and pretty much they're beefy units. They're meant to take punishment from the enemy, so that your from your glass cannon units, the ones that don't really have hit points, to survive longer. So I'm using Joan, Alexander, and Churchill. But after I will get Hannibal, obviously I will I will change it to Hannibal, Joan, and Churchill, and leave Alexander be. When you level the generals, the first thing I would suggest is try to get them to level 21, because that's when they start having a ranged attack. And after that, I would suggest that it's best, in my opinion at least, to level two of them higher, instead of trying to keep all of them in the same level range. So basically, for example, in my case, now that after I had all three of them, Joan, Churchill, and Alexander 21, I started focusing on leveling just Joan and Churchill, because they are the best. I mean, yeah. So that's the case for me. I hope this
Nice.
answered the question.
Yeah.
Okie dokie. So now that we've gone over the building stuff, we can go over the chapter 2, attack setup by ages. I mean, if you have any questions now about a certain age or setup, because it's really, I don't think I should start reading out loud everything I've written here. For example, at the Iron Age, it's where I've first explained what Love and Power asked me about the attacking style, and it was a good question. The point of deployment really matters a lot. And also, one thing, when you deploy, it's not just the point of deployment, it's the order of deployment that should matter, because you shouldn't start with your mercenary units, especially something like war elephants, because they will just start going for defensive structures, so they will move ahead of your army. That means they can get killed easily by some defensive structures, and also trigger some unwanted units way too early. The best way is to start deploying your army, and when your army is almost entirely deployed, then you start deploying the mercenary as well. So they will catch up to your army and get ahead of them. Another thing is when you use wall breakers, because you're gonna need wall breakers to penetrate the walls, especially as ages go higher and higher and the walls get tougher, and the structure of the base gets more complicated. You can't just expect that your shooters will penetrate the walls. So you shouldn't deploy the wall breakers as soon as you start the attack, because they can either get killed by traps or by towers very easily. So there should be some kind of units in front of them to take out the initial hits, so they can actually make it to the walls safely to break them.
Sorry, to go back to what you were just saying about the mercs, you said don't drop your the elephant archers in your merc, but what if you don't have a stable and
No, I didn't said elephant
sorry.
archers. I said elephants, because you have elephants in lower ages.
Okay,
You have
so
two type of
would you
elephants.
still do it that same way if you were, say, using tank destroyers, or would you still do it that same way if you were, say, using
No, this was actually
Irish peacekeepers?
No. This was actually just for the lower ages, because I've started
Okay,
from Iron Age, Classical Age. That's basically before you go towards industrial. Basically, I'm saying industrial and not global, because in industrial you get decoys, and decoys can help you take a lot more punishment. So you don't really need to place something like mercenaries or generals with your main army to place them in front of you, you know. So that pretty much industrial is the place where you can start splitting things up a lot more when you get those decoys. And for the later ages, like you mentioned, with tank destroyers and peacekeepers, it depends a lot, because that's when you get silo in global, and you have to split your high level HP troops, meaning generals and mercenaries, from your army, so that the silo won't focus them. When you have high level generals, like really high level, let's say about above level 40, you don't really need the mercs with them. So instead of tank destroyers, a lot of people have been using Irish peacekeepers to add more offensive power on the main army. But yeah, that's a very late game thing. I hope this answered your question.
So when you're saying at the earlier ages, you were saying don't drop the merc camp early on. What I was trying to get at is, at the later ages, would you still do that, or would you change it in aspects of would you drop? Because for me, I actually dropped the merc camp first. Not I dropped my generals, and then I dropped my coalitions, then I dropped my merc camp first, because my Irish peacekeepers, since there's so many of them, they have to spawn. And it'll take them so long to get out if I drop them last, that they'll be lost in the back there and not be doing much. So I was curious, like, is there a reason if it does? Would you change it, or how you would do it differently and stuff like that?
Yes, you are correct. I was actually making the reference just for the lower age when I said that. True. When you are talking about silo tags, I also start with the mercenaries and generals. Mercenaries when we're talking about tank destroyers as a silo destruction, but also when you're talking about those Irish peacekeepers. And another thing, when you're deploying the army, I always prefer to deploy first things that spawn the most amount of units with the least amount of clicks. So that means I always prefer to deploy at least when not saving things for cleanup. So let's imagine you're not saving anything for cleanup and you're deploying everything at once. I prefer to deploy the Lance Gate, the coalitions, and the mercenaries, because those deploy with one click a lot more units than just one by one. And obviously, you use more fingers than one to do it, so it's not going to take a long amount of time. So yeah, I hope it clarifies now that aspect.
Hey, you got 2 questions by Love and Power.
Mm-hmm.
Let me find the first one. At what age do you suggest leveling up generals on a rushed offense account, and why?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Oh, lost it again. Crap. At what age do you suggest leveling up generals on a rushed offensive account, and why?
Well, first of all, I've been well, I can tell you what I've done. So, for example, in lower ages, I've been leveling my 3 important generals or 2, whatever, depending on what I had, to the max of what I had. So, for example, I would suggest getting at least level 21 if possible on 2 generals, but it's not really needed because, for example, if you're industrial, I've been playing as in industrial. I've been attacking atomic bases, and I've had some generals that were below level 21. I think I had 116 and 221 or something like that. So it's not really important to try to max them to the highest level that you can, because, for example, in industrial it's level 30. I think you have a lot of options to somewhere around 16, 21. Yeah, that's okay. You can have a lot of options to help you with your attacks. For example, something that I've done was to use decoy to increase the amount of weight of my silo army. And what I was doing, I wasn't deploying a decoy right in the spot where my silo army was initially placed. I was deploying it in the spot where my silo army will be in the next 4 or 5 seconds, because by the time silo will hit, those units will actually start walking in a direction, and I don't want my decoy to be left in behind, because that will actually not add any weight. Another way to handle it is just to sab the silo, so it won't hit you as much. So yeah, 1621 is pretty much a good thing to do. You always have to try to pay attention to the levels, because there are some sweet spot levels from 5 to 5. So the first one, so basically levels like 11, 16, 21, and so on. Those give you a lot more bonus than the rest of them. So if you're gonna level your generals, let's say level 30, don't leave them at 30. Get them to 31, for example. Yeah, I hope this answered the question. Anything else about this?
He had one more. So he said, you say to deploy your generals first as a low age player. Wouldn't it be better for 50% QV to deploy them last, as you should never deploy near dangerous area of effect anyways? In parentheses, unless you're dropping heavy artillery near a low level catapult in range.
I'm not really saying deploying them first. I don't think I've said well, you can actually deploy them quite well a bit after you start deploying certain things like ranged siege units, because they will start moving forward faster and they'll get ahead of your army. So you could deploy something like ranged siege, then deploy a few shooters, the generals, mercs, and try to also add the wall breakers, so they're not gonna be left behind. Um, you have to, when you deploy also the wall breakers, you have to take into account that they should reach the walls pretty much 1 second after your army, something like that. So they're not gonna be there too early, but neither too late. Because if your army is, I don't know, spending like 5 seconds on smashing their heads on the walls, they're not gonna be effective. They're not gonna be effective either if you they reach first and they die to traps or towers. So yeah, don't start with generals, but don't place them last either. Try to mix things up. So pretty much what I would suggest is do a lot of friendlies and get used to the speed of each unit type, because different units move at different speeds and have different type of targets. For example, the targets which go for the defensive structures will always get ahead of the units which go for any kind of unit or building. So you have to make sure that you deploy them at different times, so that they keep a certain line, at advancement. That's what I'm trying to say here. Yeah. So I hope this answered the question. I see a question there about what age level are you, Siro? I think you mean the game age. That's Cold War age for me, and I'm currently 230 in level. And yes, I've been in the Valentine's War. Okie dokie. So another thing, let's go over coalitions, because I think some people will wonder about when would you recommend going Cold War? Well, pretty much as soon as you hit 220. That's what I've done, and what that's a lot of other people will do. I mean, I've seen people that are like a level 250 and they're still atomic, and and okay, so I guess you can answer this question in different ways. First of all, it depends if you're an attacker or if you're a defender. If you're a defender and you emphasize, you put a lot of effort and time into upgrading your base, there are a few very successful people which have taken their time with their bases, and a lot of people are taking them lightly when attacking them. For example, Zero Babel, he's a great defender, and um, he's not leveling to an age as soon as he can, because he wants to make sure that his defense is super good. So if you're an attacker, I would definitely suggest to go for um, the the first level that you can go for. So for atomic it's 150, for Cold War is 220. Okay, so going 3D, which are your 3 to go calls? Yeah, Drake. First of all, I'm an attacker, so I'm not really on the defensive side. But you're right about the calls. Skip Indians. That's not really a coalitions that people would like to use. For offensive ones, I would suggest obviously Aztecs, Mongols, and Cherokee to begin with. Obviously, the Aztecs and Mongols are the most important ones early on. And I would make the switch to Yeah, and coalitions are basically an important thing of why I would not mix my army too much, because I've seen people in enlightenment or industrial that they tried to mix a lot their army. I mean, having like half Berk army half and half factory, and I don't really suggest that. And why I say this is because you can't actually um, cover all your troops with coalitions to make them effective. So if you go with Aztecs, Mongols, and Cherokee, you're not gonna cover at all the factory troops. If you try to go with Americans, you're not gonna cover your barrack army. So it's best not to try to mix them too much. Okay, so I see another question. Do level 17 walls make it viable? Not really. Well, I think this is a better question for a defender, to be honest. But I haven't actually seen any kind of problem with facing level 17 walls. Um, to be honest, I mean, at this point, I'm just using a composition of RPGs, machine gunners, and I use some machine gunners basically for their suppression effect, pretty much, so that the enemies deal half the damage and are slower, especially heavy tanks, for example, or generals. And also a healing chopper to keep my troops alive. It's also the healing chopper is also really good in synergy with the assault rally, because I get really low damage. I take a very low amount of damage with assault rally on. So the little damage that I take, the healing chopper can heal up pretty quick. So it's a nice thing to have. Some people also still use some wall breakers. I currently do not, but they're still good to use in some certain situation. So, but yeah, the level 17 walls, I wouldn't say that they pose too much of a problem currently. The defensive side is a bit underpowered at the moment. Yeah. So, do you have any more questions about this, or about coalitions in general? Also, if in case I've missed any question, since I was also looking at the guide, please feel free to interrupt me and let me know via voice.
Will do.
Okay, dokie. Okay, so I don't think I'm go every age now, because it's not really that important. I strongly recommend that well, at least new players go through the guide and read age by age, because it will help with setting up the army composition, because I've seen a lot of people using things like mortars or going with a lot of heavy infantry, and heavy infantry is really a bad decision for pretty much any age, except the only heavy infantry that you should use is the one that it's spawned from APCs, and that's basically from atomic and above. So yeah, it's pretty much covers every war structure, what you should use or what you could use, because there are a lot of options, and I think I covered most of them, I hope. What I would like to read, though, is the common mistakes people make in war, and I would like to go over each and every one of them. And that is chapter 4, Lex, in the guide at page 25. Okay, so we could start with that. So rally towards the town center. Yeah, that's a really bad thing to do. No matter your age, the age you're in. Because for example, in later ages, if you do this, your units will ignore the other structures like defensive towers, and they will get slaughtered on their path towards the town center. You don't even need to worry about rallying to town center early on. If you deploy your troops right, you don't even have to use rally at all for a lot of attacks early on. So don't stress about it too much. Having no wall breakers, that's a big problem. It's not as big in early ages, especially if you use gate troops from gate bazooka units, because they're pretty much a very good unit all around, and they also break walls nicely. But it's still nice to use some wall breakers, especially if you don't have access to bazookas. Sending wall breakers in before the troops. I think I've got that covered before, mentioning why it's a bad idea. Using raiders, yeah, don't do it. Raiders are a very bad option, because they just go for the resources and get killed by any kind of unit or structure. Using melee infantry, I've also explained that one. Don't use melee infantry unless you're using it from APCs. Heavy cavalry in war, you don't need it at all. Yeah, that's another thing that I've seen a lot of people do. They use a lot of tanks and heavy cavalry. Don't all the beefy units that you need are the mercs and the generals. That's all you need early on, and obviously the gate if you're using bazooka. Using sabotage too early, yeah, some people will use it too soon. So by the time that your units will actually reach the point where those buildings are sapped, it's gonna be too late, so you're wasting it. It's the same with decoy. If you're using it too early or too deep, it's gonna be more harmful than good, because if you deploy a decoy in the center of the base, you're gonna spawn every unit from those buildings, and they will come for you. So it's basically even worse than not using the decoy at all, to be honest. And I'm not talking here about high level strategy things like using a decoy and then planing the units that come out. I'm just talking about industrial age or global age, where you don't use those kind of tactics, for example. Okay, so yeah, letting town center troops wreak havoc. Basically, you have to pay attention on what spawns from town center, and to either plane the units, either not let them spawn at all with sabotage, or decoy. Deploying close to a stronghold, yeah, it's also a very bad idea. The only way I would suggest deploying close to a stronghold is if you know 100% sure that the stronghold is empty. So to do that, for example, if it's a high level base, you can send somebody to scout it for you, to send some troops and to see if anything comes out of stronghold. If it's a low level base, and you've seen that they don't use troops at all in any kind of base to fill the stronghold up, I mean, I guess that's also on the safe side, but still I wouldn't suggest deploying close to stronghold, because it creates a bad habit for later on. Using deep decoys, I've explained that earlier. Demolition, I wouldn't suggest using demolition at all, but if you do use it, and I mean here, for example, gunpowder or enlightenment at most, I wouldn't use demolition above that at all. At least use it properly. So for example, if you have a base that has 4 mortar towers, at least make sure that when you use the demolition, those mortars are taken down. So don't rush to use one demolition each on every mortar. Make sure that after you use one of the demolitions, that tower is taken down. If it's not, use another one. It's better to take down 2 towers instead of just having four low health mortars still up, which will still deal a lot of damage to your troops. So yeah, pay very much attention with that tactic, but I suggest not to use it at all, to be honest. What else do we have here? Yeah, using demolition on silo. Well, that's pretty much self-explanatory. I wouldn't suggest using demolition at all at that point, and especially not on silo, because you will waste a lot of tactics to take down a building that should have been taken down naturally by your army. Slow deployment. I suggest using 2 or 3 fingers if you can to deploy your troops, especially if you're deploying barrack troops, because those have a lot higher amount of units than factory. So you can't afford to just deploy with 1 finger. Another thing, I strongly advise against deploying all units in the same spot. Even if you deploy with 2 fingers, try not to deploy in the same spot. Try to move your fingers left and right to create a line, because like this, you can cover a higher area that your units can attack. And for example, let's take the ranged siege units. If you spawn the siege units in just one spot, all the siege units will attack the same building. So for example, let's say you have 5 or 6. Instead of having 5 or 6 attacks on the same building, which is going to be taken down in 1 or 2 hits, you would rather have 5 or 6 hits on 6 different buildings. So that's the important thing of having them spread in a line and not just in a single spot. Using planes to take down random targets. Yeah, don't do that. Prioritize certain things. If you're in a higher age, obviously, go for heavy tanks from bunkers. Go for the spawned heavy tanks from factories, because for example, let's say you deploy your silo defenders, and then you won't pay much attention to them, and they encounter a factory. You have to pay attention to that heavy tank, because it can deal a lot of damage, and then you can wonder why the silo is targeting you. That's because your silo destruction is half dead and it doesn't have enough HP to counter the silo effect. Using bombers. Well, I don't really want to make them useless. I want to say this thing about bombers. It's a niche unit. It's pretty much like commandos. So if you want to use them, you have to devise your strategy around them. So for the majority of the players, like 99% or let's say 95% of the players, bombers are not a good choice. You have to go with fighters. If you want to go with bombers, you have to devise a certain strategy around it. And yeah, I'm not gonna go into it now, because it might confuse some people. So yeah, try to avoid them. Deploying your gens and mercs alongside your army when facing a silo. So obviously this is a bad idea, because the silo will target them, and if you have units around them, they're gonna get hit also. So yeah, it's a good idea to split. Single point deployment I've covered. Mortar units obviously not, because they're bad. They're worse in damage compared to the range siege. And healing trucks. Well, yeah, I wouldn't call them a bad, but I wouldn't use too many of them either, because I would rather prefer having more shooting infantry, at least in the lower ages. But it's a matter of preference, this. So you could use like 1 or 2, but I wouldn't use like 3 or 4, at least me. Some people do, but try not to overdo it. Some things that I haven't covered here are, for example, the assault rally. So when you use assault rally, always make sure that you don't do it in an area with funnels. So it's always better to use the normal rally first if you can on a wall, break it down. And then, like King the Hookster suggested in his previous video, you can try to use the assault rally in front in a place where a building has been already destroyed, because that area will not have any traps in there, and it's gonna gather your troops, not just attack that building and then spread around in 5 directions. Especially if it's a funnel. If you're having if you're attacking a base that it's built like a maze, and your troops start splitting in 3 directions, it's gonna be pretty much game over at that point, especially if that base has hold gates. So you have to be very very careful with how you keep your troops together. Okay, so what else do I have here? What steps should I take to improve? Obviously, you have to check your battle replays. You have to try to spot your mistakes. You can't pause the video, unfortunately, unless you actually record it and play it back. But you have to watch it a few times to see the things that you've missed, either because there were too many things to do at once, or because you were paying attention to something and you are not looking at your, I don't know, let's say silo army, or your troop tactics that you've deployed in a different corner. You have to be receptive to change. You don't have to be too rigid. What I mean by this is not try to use one certain strategy and then to have it too hard for you to change, because you have to be very receptive to the new rebalances in each patch, because in one patch you can have like I don't know, 1 or 2 good units or troop or war tactics that are very viable, and in the next one they might get very bad. And if you're not gonna change your composition just because you're too used to it, you're not gonna perform at the same uh, how should I say it, at the same level as you did before. Check replays or videos from other players. Obviously, if they're good players and they explain it, and they explain things to you, it's nice to have another opinion. Also, it's nice to ask other people to watch your replays, experienced players, because they might spot some things that you've missed. And you don't have to settle just for saying, okay, so I've got 5 stars. Wow, I've made a super good attack. It's not always like that. For example, maybe the base was really easy. Maybe you've overdone things, like going with 4 troop tactics on a base that didn't really need any, and it was overkill. Maybe you've used a bad composition of troops, but because you used those troop tactics, it didn't matter. So you have to pay attention to every detail of the attack, regardless of the amount of stars that you've received. And obviously, when you fail an attack, you learn the most. Yeah. So yeah, practicing in challenges is really important. For example, for me, I've learned a lot when I've been in the Valentine's War, because I had a lot of time to practice on other people's bases without troop tactics. I've seen a lot of nice layouts that I haven't seen before, and it was really nice to fail on them actually, because yeah, I've failed on some bases until I've managed to succeed, and that helped me a lot. And scouting, yeah, obviously you have to scout the targets that you're gonna hit and prepare. You don't have, obviously you're not gonna just look at that base for 30 seconds before the fight and try to devise your strategy on the spot. Before this assault rally tactic was introduced, I was scouting and trying to devise a plan, sometimes for even 30 minutes for a very hard base, because there are a lot of things to take into account. Now, not so much. You can plan for a battle in like 2-3 minutes, and that's it. but you still have to try to think about it a bit, not just go and rush into it. The World War Hall, yeah, that's a really important building. Here I want to thank Stabmaster for his YouTube video and guide which he made. It helped me a lot to understand better um, the the order of the importance, let's say, importance of certain artifacts that will help your army more than others. I've made a few tweaks to his rankings, but it's pretty much more or less the same. So for war weapons, obviously I've tried to split this into 3 sections. So one for the barrack army, another for the factory setup, a mixed factory setup, and another one for the heavy tank setup. I'm not really gonna go over each bonus now. I mean, you can check those things later on. I'm gonna mention some things though. So it's obviously for um, as a rule, the damage of your damage dealing units is much more important than the ones of your how should I say it, front line units. So for example, for barracks, I've valued more ranged siege and ranged infantry over heavy infantry, obviously. For war armor, fighter hit points, yeah, fighter hit points is much more important than fighter damage, because you want to keep your planes as long as possible, and you're gonna use planes no matter what composition of army you're gonna have, and the more you can send them in, the better for you. So fighter hit points is pretty much the best thing that you can get from war armor, regardless of the composition of army that you use. For war equipment, it's pretty much the same for all composition, at least the top 3. So all enemy defensive tower hit points, enemy defender spawn time, and all enemy defensive tower damage are pretty much the top 3. What I would like to mention here is that the first 2 are pretty much the same as importance, the tower hit points and the defender spawn time. But I think I value more the tower hit points on lower bases, and by lower bases I mean bases that are not fully developed in Cold War, and bases without hold the gates. After you get hold the gates, and after you get a certain point of maturity in level, the defender spawn time, it gets more important, at least from my perspective, because the enemy spawns a lot a lot faster, the units. So this bonus will help you a bit more, but obviously they are both very, very important, and you should have at least three good lines in an artifact to keep it. If you have any questions about the bonus artifacts, feel free to ask. Sorry, I meant the bonus of the artifacts. Yeah. Also, okay, so if you don't have questions, I can just move over to the next chapter, importance of library. So I don't really have to mention this now. It's pretty self-explanatory. I've tried to explain every element from library, why it's good and why it's not. I've tried to write mostly the I've tried to explain for the offensive ones basically, because I'm not taking into account the defensive ones. And that's pretty much it for the guide. Lex, if you're still here, you can switch to the YouTube video with the attack if you can. Oh, Lucid, yeah. So does anyone have the guide to making a rushed AA account? What do you mean by that?
I believe it's a guide that I think no Velcro made. I think, but I tried asking him and I got no response. Maybe ICM knows. I don't know, but it's out there somewhere and it's actually like super secret. So if anyone has it, they should like
Oh,
PM. That'd be awesome.
I understand. Yeah. No, I honestly haven't seen it. I don't know it.
I doubt
Super
it.
rushed,
That's
pretty much. Yeah,
no, that
yeah,
guide is
Wowzers.
that guide is meant for 66, and it's not. If they want to go to public.
I'm gonna get it. All right, I'm gonna get it. Keep it in my
Yeah.
keep it in my safe box.
Okay, so if you have any more questions about, I don't know, artifacts or other things, please you can ask me now. If not, we can go over the replay of the attack that I've made earlier. So Blex, when you can start it, let me know. So I'll start it myself.
All right, starting in 3, 2, 1, go.
Okie dokie. So yeah, this is from the current war that we're having in Talon's Edge. It's their number 1. It has just one defensive coalition. You can easily see here that I've started deploying first my the silo force, the generals, and the mercenaries, tank destroyers, and I've started attacking with my main army from the Alliance Gate side, mainly because he has there a lot of HP buildings. He pretty much has like an all-you-can-eat buffet. 3 wonders inside the silo, another wonder on the edge. So I've deployed most of my units in the middle. I've deployed like a few bazookas on the corner between Forest and Alliance Gate, and the Alliance Gate troops on the other corner. And now, after I'm reaching the part with wall section between how should I say it, between the town center and the rest of the base, I've used Blitz, because one mistake that this guy has done here is that he's massed all his spawning buildings in one spot. So maybe this wasn't the best example as a base to show, because it was really easy to counter. But this is why I've used Blitz so late, since there was nothing to prevent from spawning early on, just in the last second. So I didn't need to use any kind of troop tactics or anything like that. It just went pretty smoothly. I think as a mistake that I've done is I've left an G alive way too long, somewhere around the first half of the battle. But apart from that, yeah, it went pretty smoothly. As you can see here, I've used as tactics 5 assault rallies and 1 sabotage. And yeah, this is pretty much it, the composition that I've used. I've used 8 machine gunners, 1 healing chopper, and the rest were just RPGs, both in my main army and the gate. Okie dokie. So if you guys have any more questions, regardless of of the topic, let me know. If not, well, this is it from me.
I'll jump in here. Siro, thank you so much for lending your knowledge and expertise to the rest of us.
Thank you so much for offering me the opportunity to do it, Zaya.
Oh, you're very welcome. I would highly recommend the guide. I've read through it and it's helped me immensely. And if you guys have, I can see a couple more questions there.
Yeah.
So if you want to keep going, go for it, but official thank you done.
Thank you. Okay, so regarding the questions, space age requirements, what I think. Well, it's not gonna be very low, so I don't think it's gonna be something like 250 because it's pretty much too close. I would say something in the range from 260 to 270. That's what I think, but obviously it's just an assumption. Anything above 270, it's pretty far-fetched because it's way too high, just for an age jump. Which composition is stronger, Zooks or Mass Infiltrators? Where I haven't used Mass Infiltrators, I think somebody else would be better suited to answer this question. But I think what I've seen is it depends a lot on the layout of the base, because some bases are designed to prevent Mass Infiltrators to actually function to their full potential, at least on OTT attacks. So I would call as OTT Zook the safer option. But when you use it with troop tactics, I'm not really sure I can answer this properly. Yeah. So the infiltrator attack is faster. Yeah, it may be faster. Okay, so yeah. Obviously, I'm not perhaps the best person to answer that question. I was only referring to OTT. Okay. If you don't have any more questions, thank you very much for the opportunity that you've given me, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I've managed to answer pretty much all that you had. Okay. Thank you, guys, and
Thanks,
bye
Siro.
bye.